Say you've just freshly installed Proxmox. The web UI works and you can spin up some VMs. That's great, but a fresh install is not the same as a production-ready setup. And this applies even for a home lab server. You may ask yourself, is my data safe on the server? What if somebody hacks into it? What if my house burns down? You may also think, what is the upgrade path on the server? And also you need to consider, if you haven't thought about it, what maintenance are you signing up for? In this video, I'm going to be touching upon most of these topics, so you can rest assured that your server is ready to handle real workloads. Here are 4 key things I would do on my fresh install of Proxmox. Number 1, system updates and some initial configuration. So we are going to configure the no subscription repositories. And for doing that, let's log into our Proxmox server. So I'm going to do that right here. And as you can see, there is a no valid subscription pop-up over here. So for now, I'm just going to close this. You don't need to do any of this manually because the community has built a set of scripts that can automate all of this initial setup for you. And inside this, you can see there is a command at the bottom here. Now we know that this is a safe command because this comes from a trusted source and it's on GitHub and it's been vetted by the community, but make sure you don't do this for any script that you find online. So all I'm going to do is copy this, head over back to our Proxmox node, go to the shell and literally just paste it in here. So that's Control V on Windows, Command V on Mac. You don't need sudo here because you're already root. So I'm going to press Y for yes and press enter. And you will see something similar to the Debian installer that we had seen earlier, but you can just keep going through most of the defaults in here. So you can turn off the PVE enterprise repository here. You can turn off the Ceph repository as well. And you definitely want to enable the PVE no subscription repository. You can choose to use the PVE test repository. This gives you new features, but typically you don't want this. You can add this later if you want to. So for now, I'm going to not choose to add this. And this is where you can turn off the subscription nag. So you definitely want to choose yes on the screen. You can choose to disable high availability right now, but I would say this doesn't really affect performance, so you can choose to leave it on. So I'm going to say no here. And this is where it says, do you want to update Proxmox VE? And we definitely want to choose yes. I will show you guys in a minute how you can do this manually as well. So this might take a bit of time, so I might fast forward my video from here for a bit. And you can see it's done now. So you can press OK here because we just have one node. And it's asking us, do you want to reboot Proxmox right now? For now, I'm not going to choose to reboot it. And we go back to our shell over here. Now I'm going to show you how you can do this manually as well, because in the future you would be doing this manually. So while you're in the node, all you need to do is click on the updates tab here. Because the script did update everything to the latest, you wouldn't see anything here. But if you want to do this in the future, you just need to press refresh over here, and it's going to try and refresh all the latest software updates that are available through the repositories. And you will see them populated in here, and you just need to press upgrade at that point. At this point, if I press upgrade, you're not going to see anything happen. Make sure to reboot your Proxmox node once you have installed any major updates. Now to show you that the nag screen is gone, let me log out. And I'm going to log back in. So the changes did not get applied because I needed to reboot my server. So I'm gonna just do that quickly. So I'm gonna press reboot. And at this point, it might take probably several minutes for this to reboot. Now, this is not going to tell me when the server has rebooted. You might want to go physically check it if it takes too long, but I'm going to try and refresh this. And if it's still loading, that means the Proxmox server is not up yet. So I'm going to give this a few minutes to be available again. I'm going to go upstairs and have a look at my server. I'll be right back. And I'm back. Proxmox decided to enable the firewall after the update. I'm not sure why. I disabled it through the command line on the server, and I could get back in now. And if I log out from here and I log back in, as you can see, no nag screen anymore. Perfect. So in terms of initial setup, one thing you want to do is set up a static IP. So to do that, you need to go select your node again, because IP addresses are unique to your node. So if you have more than one node, you would have more IP addresses to configure. And you want to go into the System Network tab. And over here, you can see that there is a CIDR assigned to the VMBR0. In your case, most likely VMBR0 will still be there. But you will also see another network adapter here. So network adapters are what allow you to connect one device to the other. So in this case, NIC0 that you see here is what corresponds to the actual physical connection on your host machine. And VMBR0 is going to be standard in most fresh installs of Proxmox because it uses what's called as a Linux bridge. It's similar to a real bridge where you can connect a set of network devices together. So in this case, it's virtually connecting a bunch of devices together using this bridge. And in our case, the devices, for example, are going to be virtual machines. So as you can see, if I double click on VMBR0, there's going to be a bridge port, and in this case, there's going to be just one bridge. Yours may look slightly different. It may start with an EN, for example. And over here, you want to make sure that the IP address assigned here is correct. And you want to apply the same settings on your router. So go to your router, figure out what your device is, and assign a static IP for this device. But in the near future, that's not going to be a problem for you if you choose to follow my tutorial on setting up your own firewall router, where you can control all of these things quite easily. One other tiny little thing you want to double check is go into time and make sure your time zone is set correctly. So you just need to go here, double click it, set the right time zone. So I'm in London over here. And that's it for the initial setup. And moving on to number 2, you want to harden the security of your system. Because this is going to be a device that is always running, and you want to make sure this is secure from vulnerabilities or cyber attacks. And one thing that you've already done in the previous section is configure your security updates, and this is a crucial part of your system security. You always want to be on the latest and most secure version of most of the software and tools that's installed on Proxmox, and also inside your virtual machines and so on. So if you've set up a password in the initial setup of Proxmox and you think that it is not secure enough, there's a way to change that. You need to click on Data Center here, click on Users. You will see only one user like this as well if it's a fresh install. Although we could use a non-root user for Proxmox, it is generally a little bit more easier and convenient to use a root user because many of the things that we are going to do on the server require escalated privileges. To change the root password, you just need to select your root user here and then press password, and you just need to enter the new password here. I'm not going to change mine over here. So on the topic of security, we need to talk about networking. One thing about Proxmox is that you don't need to have Proxmox always connected to the internet. Currently, we are doing that. The default way Proxmox connects its VMs to the internet is using the virtual bridge. So if I go back to the Proxmox node and I select network, So the way internet traffic flows inside Proxmox is it comes in from the physical adapter, that is NIC 0 in my case. The virtual bridge is hooked up to this. So it says that's the bridge port. You can obviously connect more physical ports if you want to. What I prefer doing is to have the ability to physically disconnect Proxmox for the internet and even from administration altogether whenever possible. If you were to physically disconnect the port on the back of your server right now, all your VMs are going to go offline. So that's not what you want. So in a future video, I'm going to show you how you can expand upon this by adding additional network cards, for example, or USB network devices where you can add more physical ports in here. And you can create another virtual bridge which are dedicated to your VMs. You would have isolated Proxmox into a separate network and all your virtual machines or sets of virtual machines into separate networks of their own. And this, along with virtual LANs or VLANs, act as a very secure way where you can make sure there is proper isolation between your internal secured devices and all the other devices that shouldn't access this. For now, I'm not going to go too deep into the network configuration. Just make sure the firewall on your main router is on. And this is all you would need for a base configuration in terms of security. Let's move on to the next section. Number 3, storage planning and configuration. At this point, you would have already configured one ZFS pool or ZFS pool, and this would be your main storage where Proxmox is installed. We'll set up another pool in the next section where we configure backups. Let's define what gets stored where inside Proxmox. So storage as well is defined in a central way inside Proxmox. So you want to go to data center and select storage. And in my case, I have some additional storage that I had set up here, but you may only have the local directory and the local ZFS. Don't worry too much about this at this point. All you need to do is make sure you select local ZFS. You will see that it has content of type disk, image, and containers. Don't worry about containers right now, but disk images are essentially where virtual machines get their storage, and that's where you would have all your critical non-replaceable data. And this is something you definitely want to store on your local drive here and then back up to other places. We'll get to backups in the next section. Speaking of storage, we need to make sure that your storage is working properly, in this case your disks. So what you need to do is select your node, go to disks, and you can see a layout of all the disks that are present on the server. So what you want to do is scroll to the right and look for the column that says Smart. So if you see OK against each of these hard drives, you're good to go. Smart is an industry standard way of monitoring hard drive and solid state drive health. So do check this from time to time. I will also show you how you can set up monitoring and some alerts if something goes horribly wrong with one of your drives. Number 4, last but certainly not the least, it's backups. Now, backups are something that is not the most exciting thing someone wants to do or talk about, but they are absolutely necessary. Keep in mind that this is a device that's going to be running 24/7, and you should expect failure to happen from time to time. So if lightning were to strike your house and fry many of the electrical devices in your house, you want to make sure that you can still restore your server. In fact, if your whole server is fried, you might need to replace it entirely. One thing you can't replace is your own private personal data that you can't just download from the internet. So we are going to use the golden rule of backups, and that is to use the 3-2-1 backup strategy. What this means is that you need a total of 3 copies of your data. One, the original, and the second and third are the copies of the original. Usually the backup copies are in a highly compressed format because you don't need to access them all the time. This way we can save on some storage space as well. And you need to store this on 2 separate media. So in our case, we're going to use a local disk and a remote backup. And make sure one of those copies is off the site. For making local backups, you could start off by using some local drives. For example, USB drives. Proxmox has a backup solution called the Proxmox backup server, but it's best to run this on another physical computer. We're not going to get into that right now. And for this setup, you can use good old spinning hard drives. You don't need anything really fast like a solid state drive. So as an example, I have this Toshiba 16 terabyte drive. You could use something like this. 16 terabyte drives are obviously going to be a bit more pricier. So if you cannot afford it, you can get something a bit smaller in terms of storage size. So I have these 1 terabyte laptop hard drives. And like most storage, we want redundancy. For demonstration purposes, I'm going to be using virtual disks instead of real physical ones. But this is how a physical drive would look inside Proxmox once you have plugged it in. In theory, Proxmox should detect devices that you plugged in after it's on. You don't need to restart. If you don't see it, do restart the server, of course. So inside this, you can see that I have this real physical drive that's connected. It's a solid state drive. So this one uses NTFS because I had an old Windows partition running on this, which I don't need anymore. But in cases like this, do make sure that you don't delete any data that you cannot afford to lose. If it's a drive that you actually just bought off of eBay, it might not show any partitions on it if the seller has already cleaned everything up. And before you plug anything you bought off eBay into your computer, make sure you connect this to a Windows or a Mac computer and run some diagnostics on that. Make sure that it is good to go. You can still verify the disk does not have any issues by coming in here and clicking on show smart values. So running a diagnostics on used drives on Windows or Mac is probably a better idea than doing it in here because they have manufacturer-made tools to verify them. For example, if you have a Seagate drive or a Western Digital drive or Samsung, for example, they have their specific software you can download and make sure that the drives are good. But for this example, I'm not going to be using the physical drive. I'm going to be using these two virtual ones. Again, I would recommend using ZFS for this. Now that we can see these drives inside the node, we need to set this up inside Proxmox for the purpose of backups. So in order to create a ZFS pool, what you need to do is go to your node, click on disks, and then ZFS, and click Create ZFS. I'm going to call it Backup Pool. So over here, make sure to choose the mirror mode. And if you don't see your disks in here, that's because Proxmox has determined that the devices have not been wiped. So if you see this, what you need to do is head back, click on your disks again. And in this case, I have a disk that is not yet wiped. So click on this and click on wipe disk. And you need to press yes. I'm not going to do that in this case. So select both the disks because a mirror needs two disks and click create. And that's it. You have your backup pool up and running. And you can verify that this is available for use by going to data center and hitting storage. You can see that it shows up here as a ZFS type storage. So let's head over to shell and enter this command. And what you can see is that Proxmox mounted the pool that you just created to a folder called Backup Pool Demo. In your case, it'll be whatever name or ID that you had given it. We're going to create a directory inside this called data. So by default, there is a default root dataset, but you can create multiple datasets. And think of datasets as different partitions that you would see in Windows, for example. You can create multiple partitions on the same physical hard drive, so it's a very similar concept. So to create a folder, I'm going to use the mkdir. And that's it. So if we head back over to data center and click add, and select directory. You want to enter that same directory that you had just created, and I'm just going to put a hyphen at the end followed by data so I can differentiate it from the root of the pool. And for the content, I'm going to choose everything else that is not a disk image or a container. So in this case, I'm going to choose ISO, container template, backup, snippets, and import. And Proxmox is going to organize all of this under the data subfolder that we had just created. Make sure to add the / at the beginning. And as you can see, it already created and mounted this for you. And we can make sure that this works by, for example, downloading an ISO directly into this. And I'm gonna head over to the Debian website and try and download this. So in order to see your storage, if you open up the node over here, you can see all the storages listed here as well. Make sure you're inside the server view, which is the default. So you can see here that Proxmox only shows the supported type of things that you can store in these places. So in this case, I'm going to choose the data over here, select ISO and download from URL. This is exactly the same thing we had done when we installed Debian in the previous video. I'm going to hit download. This might take a few minutes. And while this happens, I want to quickly talk about redundancy versus backups and why you should treat them as two different things. So redundancy is when you have two disks, for example, or if you want to, we can have two nodes in the cluster. So if one of these fail, there is a failover, there's redundancy, and you can continue accessing and using the system as if nothing happened. So this is to reduce the downtime that we have. Backups, on the other hand, serve a different purpose. This is where if we lose the entire machine, when you lose access to all of your data, you can restore everything from the backups. And as you can see, I have managed to download this ISO. So this is working perfectly. And if I head over to the backup tab, you can see that there is nothing configured in this. So I'm going to head over to my Debian server here, which we had configured in the previous video, and head over to the backup tab and hit backup now. And this gives you a few options here. So one thing you definitely want to change here is to use the stop mode. And what this does is make sure that the virtual machine is shut down before the backup initiates and it resumes after the backup completes. We can leave all the other settings at their defaults and hit backup. And it's done. Now if we head back over to the particular storage where we expect to see the backups, we can see that the backup is listed here. And another thing we want to do is configure automated backups. We don't want to keep manually backing up our server. So for that, you need to go to Data Center and click Backup, hit the Add button. And I'm going to choose the only node that I have here. Set up a schedule that works for you. I would say something like once every day is a good idea. You can do it twice every day as well. So I'm going to choose every day at 9 p.m. You can change the time here if you want. And you can choose to include all the virtual machines or the selected ones. So you can manually select the ones you want to back up. And similar to what we did before, we can leave all the other settings except for the mode at their defaults. So if I hit create now, it would have created what we would call a scheduled task or a cron job in Linux terminology, where it runs at a certain time as we've configured it to execute this task and be done with it. That doesn't mean we let this do its thing and never worry about this again. We will set up some monitoring on the server to make sure these tasks always execute. And if in the case for some reason this task did not work, we can set up a way where we get notified even on our phones. Now that we have actually made a backup, how do we make sure that this backup works? I'm going to actually show you a really cool feature of Proxmox and virtual environments, like virtual machines. So in this case, what we want to do is simulate a crash. For example, let's say I've completely lost my Proxmox server. So I'm going to select this and press remove. This is a bit drastic. You don't need to do this yourself, but you can pay close attention to what I'm doing here. So I'm going to make sure I destroy the disks as well. And don't worry, this is a virtual disk. It's not destroying your physical disk at all. So the Debian VM is completely gone. How do we get it back? So let's head over to the backup section under data center. So let's head over to the storage location where we have made this backup. So you can see it is here. Now I'm going to select this and hit restore. It's going to ask me where do I want to restore this to. So if my VM was that, I'm going to use the same name. You don't have to use the same VM ID. So I would want to restore this to the original location, which was local ZFS. And I can pretty much leave everything at their defaults and hit restore. And that's it. So if we head back, we can see that our virtual machine has magically appeared again. And if I head over to console, I'll show you that it actually works. As you can see, it detected Debian and it should boot into it automatically. That's it. We are at the login prompt. So as I did in the previous video, I'm going to try and SSH into the server. I'm going to use my non-root user for this. And that's it. I'm back at the prompt. And if you were wondering, do I need to set up all the services that I had set up before? No, because you had backed up the entire virtual environment as is. You get everything back. So if I head over, I'm going to reload my Portainer page. You can see that it works. There you go. You can see that Actual is still running in here. And in fact, I can even open up Actual. Let me reload Actual. And as you can see, Actual works. Now coming to the topic of remote backups, if you are lucky enough to have a friend who is geeky enough, who happens to also be happy to run a server of some sort, ideally Proxmox, you can use that as your place where you store your remote backups. And in terms of privacy, this is not going to be an issue because you are going to definitely encrypt your backups. So even if you're going to store it on your friend's server, you are not going to be giving the keys to all your data to your friend. But for most people, you would want to store this on a cloud storage provider. And in my case, I use Hetzner Cloud, which is an extremely low-cost storage provider. And I get probably 1 terabyte of storage for as little as €4 or the equivalent of that. But in this video, I'm not going to be talking any more about remote storage. I'll cover that in a separate video where we are going to use Backrest as a tool that we can deploy using Docker, similar to Actual Budget, and it gives us a really wonderful web UI where we can configure backups. So to summarize the 4 things that we had done in this video, we set up software updates and also did some initial configuration using an automated script. We got rid of the nag screen, for example. We understood the security posture of the server and potential improvements. We reviewed the storage configuration of the server and contemplated the future expansion. And finally, we set up a local backup strategy. I wouldn't recommend using this for real mission-critical production apps yet until you have configured remote backups. For now, have fun playing around with your server a bit more. Tinker around with various settings that you have on Proxmox, but make sure to back up all your data, and I'll see you guys in the next one.